that's really why I'm running for mayor, because I don't believe it has to be that way, and it certainly can't remain that way if we're going to continue to cast ourselves as a world-class city. That this tale of two cities, the division that exists within the city of Chicago, where those that have get more and those that do not have continue to experience loss, that we can change that.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and this is our first podcast of 2023, and boy, do we have a whopper for you. We have with us today the next mayor of the city of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, and while the election hasn't happened yet, and I don't know if he'll win it or not. I certainly hope he does. But this is a serious candidate. This is not a protest candidate. This is somebody who is a Cook County commissioner right now and has raised a lot of money, and not as much as the gazillionaires, but enough to be a credible candidate, and has the endorsement of the major progressive unions in Chicago, my union, the Chicago Teachers Union, where he came out of, as well as big SEIU healthcare local, and so and others, and so and he has ward organizations. He'll talk about this in the interview, but this is a serious candidate, and we wanted to dig in a little bit more to electoral politics this year, and we're starting right off with it. This is not, I don't think anyways, that we should be getting involved in the, vote for me, I'll set you free. Brandon will lay out his program, what he thinks needs to be done, and people here can judge. But at Fight Back Radio, I think we've said we need to get into electoral politics, but we need to do it to expand the power of working class people and oppressed people. So if there's if a candidate improves the position of organized labor, of organizations fighting for full equality, those are the kind of candidates that we need to support. And in Chicago, the mayor election, the aldermanic elections, they're coming up February 28th, so it's not so far away. But also on the ballot is a district council for police elections. For the first time ever, we'll be electing people that have some kind of power, and we'll talk about this a little bit more going forward, but some power to control our police departments, to hold them accountable, and to set policy for the police department. So we're going to be encouraging people to get involved in these elections in Chicago because they're important. But Brandon Johnson, as I mentioned, he's a commissioner of Cook County, or he sits on the Cook County board. He's also a member of the Chicago Teachers Union. He was a teacher in one of the schools that was very close to our in the housing project, Cabrini Green, so he brings these things to the table, and I think you're going to enjoy this interview. So here he is, Brandon Johnson. So I'm here with Brandon Johnson, who's running for mayor of the city of Chicago. Welcome to Fight Back Radio, Brandon.
Hey, thanks for having me, Richard. It's good to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you. And let me start by just asking you, whatever the ultimate question: why are you running for mayor? What's so bad about our current mayor, Lori Lightfoot?
Look, I've had the privilege of serving as a Cook County commissioner for the last 4 years. Recently sworn in again, and preparing to continue to build a more progressive county board. But the best job that I've ever had is that of a public school teacher. And just over 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to start teaching here in Chicago. Taught middle school in Cabrini Green, 7th and 8th grade, reading and social studies. And I taught a year of high school at Westinghouse College Prep, which is on the west side of Chicago, where my wife and I are raising our 3 children. And, teaching in Cabrini, I think, is the space that politicized me the most. Because
So this is a housing project in Chicago, Cabrini Green, was very poor and mostly African-American, almost all African-American.
Yeah, that's correct. It's really the epicenter for everything that is wrong with the city of Chicago and just politics in America in general. But it also, is a place where I think we can point to for what's possible. But the challenge of teaching at Jenner, or teaching in Cabrini Green in general, was the fact that my students where Cabrini Green is located could literally see the wealth of the city. So downtown Chicago was within sight, it was within view. I mean, it was, quite frankly, it was walkable. So they could see the wealth of the city out of their back windows. But when they would look out their front windows, everything in front of them, they had bulldozers staring them in the face, preparing to destroy their public housing. So my students, in other words, as well as their families and Chicagoans throughout the city, wake up every single morning in Chicago, chasing down an economy that's behind them while everything in front of them is crumbling. That's really why I'm running for mayor, because I don't believe it has to be that way. And it certainly can't remain that way if we're going to continue to cast ourselves as a world-class city. That this tale of two cities, the division that exists within the city of Chicago, where those that have get more and those that do not have continue to experience loss, that we can change that no one in the city of Chicago should be too poor to live in it. And I'm running to ultimately build bridges across this city so that the economy that has clearly worked for a handful of people, that economy works for everyone.
So what you're talking about, though, is, this is happening across the country. The neighborhood you talked about where Cabrini Green was has been transformed. It's not the same neighborhood that you taught in a number of years ago. And as you mentioned, it was in the process of transformation then. But, housing is a major issue. And developers have had a heavy hand in how this city is run for a long, long time, in my view. And knowing what developments were happening, how neighborhoods would be changed. As mayor, how do you lift up the poorest neighborhoods without turning them over to developers and gentrification and things like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, one of the things that we have to do right away is to make sure that our school system is a fully funded school district that supports all of our students and all of the needs. I don't think we talk enough about how, not just how hyper segregated this city is, but how that hyper segregation has led to tremendous stratification within our school district, where poverty as well as crime is so concentrated in a handful of neighborhoods that has left many of our communities in such despair. Absent, a mayor that actually believes in public education, it's really impossible to have a world-class city and a city that doesn't succumb to the type of gentrification that leaves people behind. And by investing in our public schools, you give communities a real anchor where, families that see Chicago as home, second and third generation, that they can send their child to a school that is fully resourced. And we're talking about social workers, counselors, libraries, librarians, the arts and sports. I'm a reading teacher and a social studies teacher. And as much as I enjoy our content, for too many of our families in Chicago, they don't attend a school that has the full wraparound services and recreation to give students that much more incentive to want to participate, right? In other words, we don't have enough fun. And that's a problem. We're talking about children, right? Why don't we have, the type of support that's needed so that, again, sports teams, drama and art, again, these are the type of music, these are the type of dynamics that I believe are a recipe for a world-class education system. And I think to that point, the way we protect the interests of working people is by also making sure that we have public housing and not just affordable housing. I think we can be far more creative on space that's available to us in Chicago, where public housing could be available for families who are just simply trying to make the ends meet. Once upon a time when there were jobs and an economy around Cabrini Green, those families, were in spaces that were supported. And, my cousins, my aunt and uncle raised my cousins in Cabrini Green. My aunt was a teacher's assistant. My uncle was a truck driver. Two of their children, my cousins, became educators. One did become an administrator, an assistant principal. We still talk to her on occasion, but the fact that public housing was available, it made life sustainable for working people. So, development does not have to come at the expense of families, right? There's ways in which we can invest in public schools, invest in public housing. We can incentivize, families like my family, where my wife and I purchased our home with 2 government support programs that allowed us to get down payment assistance. And as a result of that, we were the first folks in our family outside of our parents to actually purchase a home. So by investing in our schools, by investing in public housing, by incentivizing support for families who want to buy a home, you can have the type of development and structure and support there that doesn't leave families behind and even worse, force them out.
Let's talk. That's there's a lot there what you just said, and I appreciate that. But let me talk about jobs for a minute. And looking at Cabrini is a good area. You're right. I remember there used to be an Oscar Mayer plant there. There used to be a Ludwig made drums for people that were musicians and stuff like that.
I think Montgomery Ward's may have been near over there too.
Yep. Montgomery Ward's was on Chicago Avenue, and these were union jobs that paid well. So it wasn't just a housing project in the middle of it was a working class neighborhood that had vibrancy, our country's deindustrialized. A lot of the money for housing was federal, so how do you, as a mayor, bring good jobs to a city, create a vibrant working class neighborhoods that aren't just so desperately impoverished?
Yeah, well, look, I think you have to be far more innovative and creative than what this administration has.
Lori Lightfoot, mayor right now, you're talking about, yeah.
Right. So, look, I think there's tremendous opportunity around green technology and green jobs that are available, for us, and by just positioning, the city of Chicago is well positioned to be an innovator, when it comes to technology and green technology in particular. So one of the ways in which I believe you bring jobs to the city of Chicago is that, one, you have to be open to the type of innovative careers that are now available. I think another way you do it is, look, the larger corporations that are in Chicago, we are well positioned with some of the brightest, the best, well-educated, talented folks in the country. And in fact, I believe the group that is most educated right now, subgroups, are actually Black women. So it's not just simply, attracting, businesses to the city of Chicago in the traditional form that we've seen. And those businesses certainly have place and value. But I believe where the real opportunities is in technology, and particularly green technology. But also we have to be very clear too, Richard, that we have a shortage of nurses, of social workers, therapists, educators, that there are still enough public sector positions, much like what we experienced during the Great Depression, where public sector in particular, exploded. The last thing that I think is important too is that there's so much to be desired when it comes to the infrastructure and the repairing of infrastructure in Chicago, that we're missing an opportunity to transform our infrastructure while also creating jobs, right? And so when you think about, the piping systems, the bridges, the viaducts, all of these, all of the infrastructure that is clearly crumbling, that here's a way in which, if we invest, as I said before, in public education in particular, which also would include, investing in, training so that individuals who wish to go into the trades could have, an opportunity to have a middle class life. That's all available for us. I mean, the amount of money that's being sent to Illinois alone for the transportation expansion that we are preparing for. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of positions. So just through transportation, infrastructure, housing, technology, particularly green technology, public sector. Again, Richard, there's no reason for anyone to be too poor to live in this city with all of the opportunities that we have to create jobs and to create sustainable living for working people.
So if I was the Chicago Tribune reporter, which I'm not, I would say, but your supporters need to be able to answer the question about revenue for this. So you're talking about a major investment and infusion of money. Where does that money come from, and how do we get that, and what obstacles do you see as mayor even of trying to get a hold of some of that money?
Well, the only obstacle that we have is that we have failed leadership that's not willing to commit to what Chicagoans want. When Mayor Lori Lightfoot assumed her position, one of the first things that she said was, you can't continue to tax those with means. She said, it's not fair to them. Now, this was at the height of our organizing, where we were pushing for a progressive income tax. 71% of Chicagoans agreed with the progressive income tax. 71%. Now, the mayor of Chicago was obviously in that smaller minority, and that said that's not fair. And apparently, she thinks it's fair to continue to place the tax burden on individuals who are working at Walgreens or Starbucks, right, or cafeteria workers, custodial folks, or teachers, right. Now, I'm glad that the city of Chicago disagrees with her. However, because she's in that position, she is a part of that blockage that prevents us from being able to have the critical investments that the people of Chicago want. Again, 71% of Chicagoans said that those who have means, with the type of structure that we established, that the vast majority of individuals would not see a tax increase, that most folks would actually have seen a tax decrease, that her inability to actually advocate for working people and middle class families has been the strain, right? So whether it's the Tribune or any other outlet or Mayor Lori Lightfoot herself, that the only obstacle that we have is someone at the executive level who is more interested in protecting the ultra wealthy in this city and, quite frankly, in the country. I, on the other hand, obviously have come from a working class family. I'm a middle child of 10. My father was a public employee, so he was a AFSCME member, but he was also a general contractor, and he also pastored a church. So he had a lot going for him, and it was tough. The ends didn't always meet at the end of each month. But coming from a working class perspective, I think working class people understand, fiscal responsibility more than anyone else, right? I mean, I can tell you, Richard, how many times my father would come home and turn the lights off, the refrigerator doors. I'm sure other folks can relate to that. I mean, I think my father's main goal was to make sure that utilities had a zero balance at the end of each month. So we certainly have learned how to conserve. But the problem that we've had, that's the strain that has been placed on working people, low income families and middle class families for too long. So we have a city that believes in progressive revenue. When I'm mayor of Chicago, I'm going to work on behalf of the city of Chicago, right? And the city of Chicago is going to have a mayor that agrees with them. And working people, middle class families will have a voice that has been missing for a very long time in government. But they're going to have someone who reflects the values of working people and middle class families. And I'm looking forward to leading that struggle. And with that struggle, I believe we're going to have the type of investments that are going to help sustain our communities and keep them safe and strong.
So Mayor Lightfoot or Mayor Emanuel before her, or the Republican talking points, would say, well, then, business is going to leave Chicago. You're going to make it too costly for them. These good jobs that we have now, the few that are remaining, will go to other places. How do you answer a question like that?
It's Chicago. people want to be in Chicago. Businesses want to be in Chicago. Again, we have a very robust transportation, that's air and ground. Again, we have some of the brightest, most talented, educated folks in the country are right here in Chicago. We also have a very robust, strong, working class families that live here in Chicago. The type of vacancy that exists in this city, the housing stock that is still available in this city, people want to be here. All of this, talk about people leaving, Richard, this last census demonstrated that that's just not the case. In fact, there are more white folks that live in the city of Chicago now than they did 10 years ago, right? I think white families experienced the largest growth, if I'm not mistaken. The challenge, of course, it's been hard for Black and brown communities, and these folks are not leaving Chicago because of the type of incentives that are being provided or lack of incentives to corporations. They're leaving because our communities are not being invested in. But look, my wife and I, again, we're raising our children on the west side of Chicago. There are parks, schools, transportation lines that are underfunded. The park district that our children attend in the summer, it closes at 1:00 in the summer. Where do you go for childcare if the park district is shut down at 1:00 in the afternoon? If you're a working family, unless you have someone like us, we have Meemaw. Thank God for my mother-in-law, who's able to fill in the gap there. But for most families, they don't have, the ability they cannot afford to have those type of gaps. So, this narrative that somehow, businesses do not want to be in Chicago, I beg to differ. And again, with the infusion of dollars that we are receiving to just, expand our transportation lines, these are jobs, right? You don't invest in a major city like Chicago to expand transportation, if you're not going to be moving business through the city. And this is still one of the largest economies in the world, the third or the fifth largest economy, depending on, which week, but it's in the top 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What business doesn't want to be in one of the largest economies in the world at the richest time in the history of the world, with some of the most innovative thinkers and the most talented workforce in the entire country? So it's a matter of actually having leadership that can actually advocate for the residents of Chicago, someone who can be an ambassador for the city of Chicago, and someone who can be really a world leader of attracting businesses to a city that historically has been, not just a city that has supported working people, but now a city that is poised for the type of innovation that the world is looking for. And in the city of Chicago should be a world-class city, and not just in name, but in actuality. And I'm running for mayor of Chicago to bring that into fruition and to make that a reality for working people and middle-class families in Chicago.
All right. Well, let me pivot back. You started at the beginning of this interview. You touched on the point of public safety, and that's a major campaign issue for all the candidates. When you announced you had a whole platform that was of the treatment, not trauma kind of version. Could you elaborate on how you would deal with that? And Chicago has been nationally. President Trump has tried to ridicule Chicago because of crime and violence and things like that. How would you address issues of public safety, which are a legitimate concern for in your neighborhood? You mentioned you lived on the west side of Chicago, which is a poor, overwhelmingly African American neighborhood. It's a concern where you live, I know as well. So, how would you deal with this?
It is. We my wife and I, we love our community, and our community has been mired with plethora of challenges. And recently we've had to change one of the windows in our children's bedroom from one of the bullets that have come through our home. I recall a few years ago when it's like right before the first day of school, where gunfire broke out right outside our home. And I can hear my kids screaming in the other room. And, I'm in my bedroom. My wife is in the bathroom. We see each other. We hit the ground and we're crawling to our children's bedroom, horrified of what we would encounter once we got in there. And the whole time that I'm crawling to my children's bedroom, I'm thinking, is this our turn? Is it our turn? And by the time my wife and I made it to our children's bedroom, as the gunshots continued to ring right outside our door, I saw my children huddled up in the furthest corner, and we just covered each other until the shot stopped. I was afraid, angry, frustrated, and relieved, because as close as it was, it didn't make it inside. But for too many families in Chicago, that is the experience. Where a night before the first day of school, could change someone's life forever. So this is not something that, that is just something that people read about in the news. This is right outside our door. I don't believe there's anyone in this race that has greater incentive than I to get this right, because it is a matter of life and death. My oldest son, he's 15, and we have to negotiate with him when he rides his bike through the neighborhood. And it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. So for me, what I'm saying is part of our plan is there's a direct correlation between youth employment and the reduction of crime. Look, I taught in our public schools here in Chicago, and I can tell you that there are some students who, very few, but there are some students who had such severe trauma that they needed additional support. Otherwise they could end up hurting themselves or people around them. But the vast majority of students just needed an opportunity and someone to believe in them. And even those students who had very, very severe trauma, they did need and still do need someone to believe in them. And the attention that they required, we're not providing enough support for what they need. And so that's why my proposal is that when I'm mayor of Chicago, I'm going to have the most robust summer youth hiring program that's going to be year round. And we're going to ask all of our sister agencies in Chicago to participate in the hiring of our young people. And I'm going to ask the businesses, small and large ones, because it is to the advantage of the entire city of Chicago to solve this challenge. So it's a summer youth program of hiring that extends year round. We can do that in the immediate. And yes, I am a proponent. This is my second part of our plan, is that to support the treatment, not trauma. That ordinance, calls for social workers and therapists and counselors to be available on the front line to provide support for individuals who are, suffering from mental health crises. And look, 50% of calls that are coming in through 911, the vast majority of them, I think 50%, are domestic related. They're nonviolent, but they can turn violent if you don't have the right individuals who are trained to deal with that crisis. And I think about Quantonio LaGreer, and your listeners and viewers could check that out. And Quantonio LaGreer was having a mental health crisis. He came home over Christmas break, in fact, and he was having a mental health crisis. And his neighbor, Betty Jones, came to support, and they both ended up dead, where a police officer shot both of them. I believe that situation turns out differently if we actually had treatment, not trauma, individuals that are trained to deal with those crises. And then finally, we have to reopen our mental health clinics, and we have to push them to be funded through public sector, right? These should be good public sector jobs that the city of Chicago invest in, where individuals can go to receive, care. I believe that if we invest in young people, if we provide the type of mental health services on the front line, so that law enforcement, much like teachers, are not asked to play out a position and reopen our mental health facilities, I believe that recipe, those three dynamics, can help change the trajectory of our city for good. Reducing violence in the city of Chicago is the top priority. And what I want for my family, I want for every single family in the city of Chicago, and their protection and security of course. What parent doesn't want their child to be safe? And quite frankly, the reason why I believe the last thing that we have to invest so much more into mental health. Schools are not are not off limits either, right? The number of school shootings that have happened throughout this country as a result of just individuals who are mentally ill, and they take their trauma out on children and teachers and staff. That not dealing and confronting the real crisis of trauma that we are experiencing in this city of Chicago is to the detriment potentially of all of us. And as mayor of Chicago, I'm going to fully invest in what works, because the safest cities in America, that's what they do. They invest in people, and that's what I'm going to do as mayor of Chicago.
Historically, the way to deal with different administrations have dealt with issues of public safety, crime, have been let's put more money into the police. And I think the police is the most funded department in the city of Chicago. I'm not sure, but I think that's true, and probably true in cities across the country. But in the aftermath of Laquan McDonald's murder here in Chicago, and George Floyd nationally there was a rebellion. And we've had some people on Fight Back Radio, Frank Chapman, maybe the most prominent, who's endorsed you, I know, who have talked about community control of the police. We had a movement around Civilian Police Accountability Council, and then eventually a law passed called the ECPS. How do you see the role the police are playing, in our communities right now, in your community? And as mayor, how would you address the positives or negatives of that?
Look, without a doubt, there's a real breakdown in communities across the city of Chicago where there is a lack of trust with law enforcement. But we also have this real precarious situation where we believe that law enforcement in and of itself is preventative. But that's just has not been the case, right? In fact, what we have experienced is that we have one of the lowest clearance rates in the entire country, where the crime that does happen, it's not solved. So part of that is leadership, right? You have to have people who actually have like a real heart for people and willing to lead the department, to put forth strategies that are community driven. But I think the most important thing right now is the fact that, we organize in this city to bring, an elected body to ultimately hold law enforcement accountable is a real big deal. And this is why I believe that my leadership is necessary, right? You don't have a lot of people who are accustomed to this type of accountability, right? And so we're going to have the district councils, right? So you have this police board that's elected. You're going to have an elected representative school board. You're going to have the city council. You're going to have the general assembly, right? You're going to need a leader that is an organizer, someone who can connect and work with all of these different governing bodies to ultimately help transform our city. And look, on the west side of Chicago, and maybe other folks see other things. Off of Laramie, that's one of the exits. They did a study on stop and frisk in Chicago, and the west side of Chicago had more stop and frisk cases than anywhere else in the city. So in other words, it wasn't an issue of whether or not there was a police presence. What we don't have leadership that is committed to doing what's necessary to have safe cities. And what safe cities do, they invest in schools, parks, libraries, public transportation, healthcare, jobs. That's what we have to do. And, anything short of that, you're not serious about reducing violence. If I'll say it like this, I have seen scenarios in Chicago where horrific, gruesome acts of violence have occurred. And when you see the law enforcement on the scene, it's like there are former students I mean, these are, police officers who are, barely 30 years old, right? 27, 28 years old. These, I could have had these young people. I could have had these individuals when they were in seventh grade, and they are just as exposed to the trauma as everyone else, as anyone else. And the goal in my leadership is far more dynamic than just simply having accountability. It's more dynamic than even having oversight. It's really about what type of city do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a city where the only way that you feel secure and safe is if you have armed guards? Is that what we want? I would think not. I mean, I don't see that in other cities. Like, I represent on the county board. I represent some of the suburban parts of Cook County. And, you don't see that in Oak Park. You know what you see in Oak Park? Oak Park is one of the more affluent spaces in the entire county, the entire state. For listeners who may not be familiar with it, it's just to the west of Austin where I live. And I see their libraries, they're open till 9:00. And they have 3 of them. They have 2 fully funded school districts. They have the green line and the blue line. They have plenty of parks, recreation. It's good jobs there. Like, people can afford to live there, and they invest in the community. And so they want to send their kids to the public schools. They send their kids to the public libraries. They utilize public transportation. There are small businesses that hire their young people to work. And this conversation about law enforcement and policing is such a narrow part of our overall debate that I don't want this to get lost in our conversation about policing. That until we demonstrate as a society that we love and care for people, and the way we do that, again, treatment, not trauma, opening up our mental health clinics, making sure that our parks and recreation facilities are supported, making sure that our schools are fully funded. The reliance upon law enforcement is a failed set of policies. And you're right. I mean, we're spending, I think this last budget, $2 billion. And we have a shortage of nurses. We have a shortage of educators. These are critical positions and jobs that if we invest and take real priority in investing in those positions and these opportunities, if we don't take full advantage of where the opportunities are, we're going to continue to keep having these conversations. And I'm getting tired of it, to be perfectly honest with you. My son, he's a freshman at Kenwood Academy. It's on the south side of Chicago. And primarily he attends a school on the south side of Chicago because there wasn't a school on the west side that had an orchestra and a soccer team, that would give my son, the ability to fully express himself in these 4 years. But his third week in school, one of the students.
So he had to go all the way to the south side to find a school.
And I'm not the only family that does this, right? We go in 2 opposite directions every single morning. We go south for our eldest to Hyde Park, and then we go to Portage Park in Northwest for our 8 and 10-year-old. But my son's third week in school, one of the students at Kenwood leaves out for lunch and he gets murdered over lunch. Now, that changes you. My son's perspective has changed. And what I'm saying is that a child was murdered on their lunch break. To what extent is this a matter of finding out what this child's life entailed and what type of support this child needed? Or would that have saved his life if we would have known that and invested in opportunities to remove whatever barriers or hindrances or trauma he was experiencing or just things he was involved in? Or would it have been having more cops to escort him from the school to some other spot for lunch? So it's a matter of, again, having a mayor who's willing to work with the district council members, also having a mayor that recognizes that you do have to have, talented people who are concerned about the residents of Chicago and they love the city of Chicago and they know the city of Chicago. You need good, competent, talented leadership to do that. And I'm going to have those folks in my administration. But we also can't lose sight that if we're just simply having a conversation about policing, we're losing the conversation.
So we're going to have a flourishing of democracy here in Chicago. We're going to have an elected school board, but the next mayor will appoint a majority of the board, and then it'll be phased in and be fully elected. This is many districts already have elected school boards, but also with we just were talking about public safety and the police. The Commission for Public Safety and Accountability is chosen by 14 people that are given to the mayor by these district councils that are elected in each police district, and that is unique to Chicago, I believe, in the sense that there's really trying to rely on the community for some of this and the movement around community control of the police. But so what role do communities have to play in community leadership, and whether it's talking about how their communities are policed, or about how their schools are run? And as mayor, how do you see that? Our current mayor has been reluctant to give up any power or to listen to or work well with the communities at all.
Yeah, I believe that's true. She's obviously reluctant. She's not the first person to be reluctant because there's a fear there. And it not only intimidates this mayor, it intimidated the previous mayors as well. They don't have trust and confidence in people. It's the difference between me and other folks in this race. That my confidence in people is based upon my experience as an organizer working with people. Like, if we didn't have confidence in people, we would not have been able to knock on thousands of doors across the city to bring about the type of change that we're going to see in the expansion of democracy. So where everywhere else in the country where democracy is being threatened, we're expanding it here. But we didn't expand it because of political leaders. We expanded it because of everyday people. And I was a part of the organizing effort to bring an elected representative school board to Chicago, to bring these district councils into fruition. And so I'm committed to identifying leaders that the community has trust in. And I'm going to have trust in the community to identify individuals that, we can put in position that will not just hold systems accountable, but that will love people enough to figure out how to best serve them. And that's important. Like, the work about power and demonstrating that power through actions and deed, that's all great. But we can't lose sight of the fact that people need people to believe in them. We need leaders who care about this city, but more importantly, care about the people of the city. And, many great leaders and organizers historically, what separated leaders in our movement from traditional political players is that you knew how much Chairman Fred loved people. You knew how much the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King loved people. You understood Fannie Lou Hamer's love for people, their willingness to risk it all, their lives, because of their love for people. And so now we are the beneficiaries of those individuals who loved people enough to put us in a position where we can lead. We can't lose sight of that. We have to lead with love. That is the most radical thing that we can do. And obviously, when we think about Gandhi and the study that Dr. King engulfed himself in, understanding that the principle of our work has to be guided by a love for people, that let's not lose sight of that. And that's actually what inspires me in this moment, is that we have individuals across this city that are organizing to not just simply elect me as mayor of Chicago. They're organizing because they know that their voices will not just be at the table. Their voices will help set and guide what's on the table, right? And that is what's going to be different about my administration. I think that's what's going to be different moving forward. And that's why I believe we are best positioned than any other candidate to not only win, but to govern with the type of co-governance that has been rejected And as a result of the rejection of our desire to co-govern, that we are experiencing the loss, the failures, the fear, the trepidation that people are feeling all over the city. And so the district council members, the elected representative school board members, you're literally going to have people from all over the city of Chicago coming together collectively to solve the challenges, the political problems that we have, and coming up with political solutions from every different section of the city of Chicago. That's what excites me. That's what's been missing from previous administrations, and that's what's going to be front and center under my administration.
I mean, I'll point out in my lifetime, there's only been one mayor. His name was Harold Washington, who actually did that. And he called together summits of around housing, around education, where he brought together all the players to talk about these things. And when he was attacked by the media and the powers that be, he relied on the community to put forward, their program and mobilize people. And so it was, whatever, for people that are old like me that remember Harold, it was an important time, and it was, after his death, we quickly went back to the old ways, and hopefully you can bring some of that back with you. And the names you mentioned are good ones. I would add to that too. Let me ask you though about you've mentioned you're a Cook County Commissioner right now. So you hold an elected office, and what are you most proud of as a Cook County Commissioner? And what has that taught you, having that elected office? And how do you what have you been able to accomplish and during the time as County Commissioner?
Yeah, look, I've enjoyed my time as a Cook County Commissioner. Cook County government is one of the largest bodies of government in the entire country. I mean, if we were a state, we would be one of the largest states in the entire union. So, the last couple of years, I've helped balance a $9 billion budget by investing in the critical services that people rely upon. So what I'm, really, really proud of is the fact that within that $9 billion budget, I worked on a couple of pieces of legislation, Justice for Black Lives and the budget for Black Lives. And as a result of those two pieces of legislation, we have secured hundreds of millions of dollars for equity. The largest amount of money ever dedicated to violence prevention is a result of the work that I led on the county board, of which a third of those dollars came to my district for violence prevention, and all of the services to prevent violence we talked about earlier. That's housing and mental health treatment. Housing, dealing with homelessness, but also making sure that we have recreation and opportunities for young people to engage jobs, right? So I feel good about that. As a result of our, equity plan and program, we have secured $10 million to reduce up to $1 billion of medical debt, which, this, that, medical debt has been one of the strongest forces that have harmed working people in this country. People lose their homes and their livelihood just because they can't pay medical bills. Well, we've transformed that structure in Chicago, in Cook County, where individuals can now have their medical debt relieved as a result of the work that I've done. We also have the largest pilot program in the entire country for guaranteed income, of which I believe 55% of those individuals that qualified in this first round, I believe there were overwhelmingly Black women. And so I feel good about the equity and justice that we have brought through this budget, and balancing a budget and working with 16 other commissioners. You have a board president. There are 10 or 11 separately elected, constitutionally protected countywide officials, from the state's attorney to the sheriff to treasurer to the assessor and so forth and so on. And so being able to work with all these different entities, along with the office of the president and 16 other commissioners, it really requires a collaborative approach to be able to balance a budget. And we've done that by not just making the case, but helping people understand why these investments are important. But, in terms of legislatively, I also feel good about the Just Housing Amendment. Sponsored that within the first 4 or 5 months of my time on the county board 4 years ago. We eliminated discrimination against individuals who were formerly incarcerated seeking housing. I mentioned as a public school teacher, Richard, I believe 87% of households that are headed within Black families in the Chicago public schools are headed by Black women. And when we were looking at this legislation, it had sat on the board for several years and no one really ran with it. We picked it up right away from the time we got sworn in, and we got it done in 4 months. And we worked with all the advocacy groups, worked with developers and the realtors to come up with a piece of legislation that folks could all feel good about, and eliminating, again, discrimination against individuals who are seeking housing, who had arrest records and were incarcerated. That really opened up opportunities for folks to have the type of security that they need to be able to make that transition, if you will, into back into society, if you will. So I also feel good about a legislation that we pushed during the pandemic. It was called Save Our Seniors. And I don't know if people remember this, but in Chicago, at least, or Cook County, the vast majority of deaths from COVID were coming from 11 addresses. In other words, most of the deaths were out of a handful of retirement and nursing homes. And so those workers did not have the proper protection. Those nursing facilities were not adequately fit and set to be able to deal with this pandemic. And so as a result of that, a statewide initiative that I pushed, legislation in Springfield was passed to bring more regulation into those spaces. So from helping seniors, formerly incarcerated, working people, middle-class folks dealing with violence prevention and eliminating medical debt, feel good about that work. And again, a $9 billion budget that has invested in working people, pulling people out of poverty, middle-class families. I feel good about that leadership, and I'm looking forward to taking that leadership to the fifth floor.
No, that's good. I mean, you talked about the pandemic and the Save Our Seniors program that you had a major role in making happen. But I'm the pandemic exposed a lot of things that had been covered over, in education. But I'm thinking right now about healthcare, especially, and in Chicago, which is part of Cook County. The county is actually responsible for whatever the healthcare provider of last resort, I guess you would say, and it was stressful, and there was strikes during this time. I remember healthcare workers. We had Greg Kelly on this show, and he was talking about who's the SEIU president of the healthcare union here in Chicago, and several states that has endorsed you as well. But they were talking about he was talking about the stress that they had as workers, but not being able to have the what they needed to provide the care they needed. As mayor, what can you do, or what plans do you have to improve the health of the citizens of Chicago?
Well, I really think it's an important question. I mean, I relied upon public health. When our family was without health insurance, the county hospital, more specifically the Fantas Clinic, was the place in which we received health care. And we weren't the only family. It wasn't perfect, but it did work. We had to stand in some long lines. You had to come back up there after you saw a doctor to get the prescription filled. And, it was a full day of activity just to be able to access an inhaler. And because I suffered from asthma, thank goodness for public health, because it saved my life. It really should be a human right. It should be guaranteed. And that's why I'm running for mayor as well, to make, healthcare, a real human right. During the pandemic, we expanded, healthcare. We have something called county care. Individuals have access to health insurance. They don't really have to use our facilities. They can use that healthcare system in any other, operation that they choose. But we have almost 400,000 families that have health insurance as a result of our work. And again, we expanded it during the pandemic. We also opened up a health clinic in my district and one just outside of my district. So we feel really good about it. And we also know that we have a long way to go. So one of the things that I'm going to do as mayor of Chicago is I'm going to collaborate with county government. The last two administrations, this one and previous administration, have been oppositional and, quite frankly, just really obstinate when it comes to finding ways to collaborate with county government. It just makes sense, right? Because, a good chunk of the city of Chicago rests and sits right in the middle of Cook County. And, I think we actually can do some things with our mental health care services as well as just healthcare in general, where we can collaborate as bodies of government to expand access to healthcare. And the more we expand access to healthcare, it actually frees up businesses to be able to provide a livable wage. Quite frankly, if we actually had a single payer system, that's just one less thing that businesses would have to put forward. They could actually have bigger salaries and still have savings, right? But we're going to continue to fight for that, Richard, for long term. But I think in the immediate, our mental health care is that has to be our top priority. And I've shared this story before. My oldest brother, Leon, had untreated trauma. And, our family, we probably didn't handle it well because we just didn't have a language for it 25 or so years ago. But because he walked around with untreated trauma, he did what, too many people do. And he looked to numb those feelings and became addicted to drugs. And my oldest brother, my hero, someone who I looked up to, died unhoused and with a very, very severe addiction to drugs. And I wonder if his life would have been different, had we had services for mental health care. And it's a top priority to me. I know they always say that you should not take politics personally. In this regard, it is personal because it's my nephews and my niece don't have a father. And their lives could have been different had my brother Leon had treatment and support. And if he were still alive, he would be a grandfather now. And so are there individuals that we can hire that could serve on the front line through county and city workers to help support individuals who are unhoused and who are suffering from trauma? I believe we can do that. I believe there are ways in which we can collaborate. We've shown that when all bodies of government, as you mentioned during the pandemic, federal, state, local government, when we work together, we can solve problems. But we have to have people who have a mind and a willingness to work together. And I have that, and I'm looking forward to working alongside of my colleagues at the county level to bring about the type of equity and justice that I believe that families deserve and want.
Good. Thank you for that. I mean, that's wow. But I want to talk a little bit about, somebody like you doesn't become mayor all the time, and in fact, usually they don't. And so, I want to talk a little bit about how you see, your path to victory. I mean, right now, you have some name recognition, but not as much as some of your opponents. The money is huge. I mentioned Greg Kelly earlier. We talked a little bit when he was on about money in politics. Money is huge in politics, and you've been able to raise a fair amount of money, but it costs just a lot. I can see you're working tirelessly. You're up early in the morning to talk to Fight Back Radio, and we appreciate that. But working tirelessly isn't enough. And so what's the path to victory for Brandon Johnson to become mayor of Chicago?
Well, look, I do believe that I have the greatest burden than all of the candidates. And it's a burden that I welcome, though, because I believe it's necessary, because the way we run this campaign is how we're going to govern. And so the coalition that has surrounded me is quite broad. Can't say that for other candidates. Black, brown, white, Asian. It's multicultural. It's multi-generational. We're already coordinating in multiple wards across the city. I think we're well over 350 volunteers thus far. Our path to victory will be the hardest path. I mean, people should be very clear about this, that this economy is not going to just simply be turned over to the people because we say we want it. We're going to have to work for it. Certainly to your tens of thousands of listeners, that's going to help me.
Well, we're not quite at tens of thousands yet, but we're maybe at thousands. But now that you're on, I think we'll hit that.
All right. Well, if people can share this broadcast and get our message out, that certainly will help us. And obviously, I want people to go to our website so they can see brandingforchicago.com, and they can sign up to become volunteers. And people can certainly, we're going to have to raise money. That's very clear. We raise the money and get our message out, we're going to win. And again, we're in multiple wards across the city. It's a multicultural, multi-generational effort. Having a strong ground game where we're touching people, we're at the doors. That's going to be critical to our work. And so we're going to need as many people out there knocking doors, and we're building up house meetings and house parties. We're raising the money. And, because our message is the most effective, it's the message that people want, but they also don't just want the message or a messenger. They want someone who has demonstrated that message is something that can actually be done. Like, we can actually govern with our beliefs. These are not just ideas. These are ideas that have transformed into policies that have transformed lives. And again, as a county commissioner, as an organizer, we've seen that with bringing democracy, appropriating dollars so that we're expanding healthcare. Like, I've done all of that, but we've done it in collaboration. The best way for me to win is for us to organize. It's just that simple. And the work that we've done together, where we've had great wins across the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, that coalition is with me. And I trust our coalition, and it's getting bigger. It's getting bigger. It's getting stronger. And, the name ID, though they may not know me personally, they know the work that this coalition has done. And when our coalition tells folks that this is the person that is best positioned, Brandon Johnson, to help lead us into the next, phase of our movement, that's the winning strategy, right? Organizing people and organizing resources. We've done that. We can do it again. And I'm extremely hopeful, and I'm inviting people to not, be consumed by the other names that are out there that folks think that they have an easier pathway because someone knows their name. Do they know their work? And you mentioned Greg Kelly. So from SEIU Healthcare, Diane Palmer, again, stood with her workers. The Cook County College Teachers Union stood with them, and they just got a contract. And I believe that our work collectively has helped lead to that contract. The Illinois Federation of Teachers, of course, my local, the Chicago Teachers Union, the American Federation of Teachers. We have independent political organizations all over the city. In fact, the vast majority, with the exception of one, of these IPOs have endorsed my candidacy. And other progressive elected officials, from Delia Ramirez, who was headed to Congress, to Carlos and Rosanna, and to Jeanette Taylor and Lakeisha Collins and Byron Sigcho Lopez. We have a broad coalition of individuals and organizations.
Those are the most progressive aldermen in Chicago.
Yeah, doesn't get that much better than that, does it? So
no,
I'm grateful for that. That's our path to victory. We are the path to victory. We come together and do what we know how to do. We're going to shift the trajectory of this economy in Chicago and set a precedent for the rest of the country.
Well, that's fabulous. We'll put your website and contact information in our show notes so people can reach you. And if they want to make a donation, I'm sure you'll accept it. But more importantly, if they want to volunteer and join the 350 plus people, we'll let them do that. We're winding down on time a little bit here, but I want to give you an opportunity if you want to say anything that we haven't covered yet or any points you want to make. Brandon, feel free to tell our Fight Back listeners, anything else you want to add.
Well, thank you, first of all, Richard Berg, for your help and commitment.
Well, you're my union brother. I'm in the CTU as well. So.
Yeah, well, no, but I do thank you for providing the opportunity to amplify our cause. People talk about the Harold Washington era quite a bit, especially here in Chicago. And one of the things that strikes me about just that moment was how little known he was, and how at one point in time he was not the most well-known name, and folks didn't think he had a chance. What changed that dynamic, it was the voice of the people. And I believe I am the only candidate in this race that truly reflects the voice of people. And I want our generation to do something pretty special here, and not just simply elect me as mayor of Chicago. That's going to be dynamic. But I want us to govern with the same amount of fervor and tenacity that it's going to take to get me elected. And this city is a lot closer to experiencing justice and equity than we realize. And there are forces that are trying to strip and take that away from us. And I'm not afraid of the challenge. I welcome this challenge. And I believe that if we surround ourselves with the same amount of fervor that we pushed for raising the minimum wage, bringing democracy into Chicago, pushing back against the unaccountable torment of jails and incarceration that has left our communities less safe and in peril, that if we actually build a movement around our values and principles, that I'm going to be sworn in, and the people of Chicago will have a real voice on the fifth floor. And so I'm looking forward to this fight ahead. And again, I would want people to go to our website, brandonforchicago.com, and there'll be places for you to sign up to volunteer and hold house meetings and contribute to our work. And really grateful for you again, Richard. So thank you for giving me the time and to Fight Back Radio. Let's go to the fifth floor, y'all.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Brandon.
All right, thank you.
Okay, what a way to start 2023. Brandon Johnson. Thank you, Brandon, for being a guest on our show. And, again, we want to encourage people to get involved in these elections. We'll put in the show notes how people can get a hold of Brandon's campaign, but also those that want to get involved in the elections for the police district councils in Chicago. We'll put in the email and the website for the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. But we need people to become active. I mean, things don't change by magic. Your savior is you. And so, while we think Brandon gives us more space and will allow us to make the changes we need, even if he becomes mayor of Chicago, the people of Chicago are going to have to continue to fight because our enemies don't go away. And having a friend in the mayor's office helps, but it's not the whole deal. Also, I'm aware that we have listeners across the country, and so hopefully this is a good snippet of how we're doing things here in Chicago, and can give you some ideas about electoral politics in your areas as well. I'm interested in people's comments from around the country and from Chicago about what they think of this. You can reach us at richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. So send us your thoughts on this. Send us your comments. We would love to hear that. Also, you can, we're on social media. If you look in our show notes, we have, we're on the Instagram, Facebook, the whole bit, Twitter. And so we want you to, check us out there and to, use that to, let others know. We want you to, give us 5 stars or give us a positive, write a positive review if you're, depending on what kind of platform you're listening to us on, or like us, whatever the thing is. But that helps people find us. And so we really appreciate that. Again, I want to give credit to the Fight Back Radio team that does so much to edit this and make this all happen. Dodd McColgan, Vince Olson, Shane Tremley. But for our entire Fight Back Radio team, I'm Richard Berg saying until next time, all power to the people.